Do you want to? Perfect. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you all for being here. This is the final session of the Grant-o-thon. My name is Lauren Fidelic. I'm joined by Yusha Tao and some other senior researchers who will introduce themselves later for some Q&A. But we are going to go through the next steps for your grant application. So we spent the last 6 weeks, month and a half, talking about the individual components of an NIH research grant. And now we're going to go over what are the next steps? What do you need to do now that you have written all of these things? Where should you look for funding opportunities? And how should you submit your grant? So if you go to the next slide, please. So today, we'll start by identifying grant opportunities, looking at the grant submission process, looking at the review process, then the award process, what monitoring and reporting will look like if you do receive a grant, and then resources from the Grant-o-thon handbook, presentation recordings and slides. And then, as I said, we'll have some time to do Q&A with some of our mentors. You can go to the next slide. So in identifying a grant opportunity, there's some things you want to think about. So first is how to select the appropriate funding opportunities, what are the types of grant programs, and then what are the types of grant applications. And then Yusha included this great quote by the English poet, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. It says, he who is best prepared can best serve his moment of inspiration. So keep that in mind as you think about finding a grant opportunity. So the first thing that you should do when you're thinking about finding appropriate funding opportunities is look at this reporter search interface. So I recommend that you all, when you have the opportunity, pull that up. You can just type in reporter search interface and it'll come up with the whole dashboard. So that you can look for similar NIH opportunities or grants that are being funded, similar funding opportunities. And then if you also use the matchmaker interface, you can put in an entire abstract and it will return similarly funded projects. It'll return the project officer and also the review committee for that opportunity. So this is a really good way to see where you are situated or where you can situate your research in terms of what else is being funded. And then you can also find potential collaborators who have some experience in the area that you're trying to get into. And so once you've found once you've situated yourself in terms of others, you can contact NIH staff. And once you have your aims and you have your strong aims, which a lot of you should after this session, you can contact the NIH to identify the appropriate institutes or centers that might be interested. And then some program officials can help you identify some distinct funding opportunities that might be good for you. And then also it's important to keep an eye on funding opportunity announcements that might fit your research. So those are put out by the NIH. They come in a couple different forms. Sometimes they're program announcements. Sometimes they're talking about distinct funding opportunities. So it's important just to keep an eye on those. You can go to the next slide. So there are several types of grant programs, and grant programs are distinguished by these activity codes that are used to separate them from each other. So we have our first series, which is our R series, and those are research grants. And then we have our K series, which are research career development awards, the P series, which are program or project center grants, and then the T and F series, which are research training and fellowships. And then there's a variety of others that kind of fall into some different categories as well that are resource grants. So I would highly recommend that you take a look at all of these and figure out which funding opportunities would be the best fit for you, especially as young career researchers. I would look at some of these like training and fellowship grants and career development awards to help you build up kind of your grant repertoire. And you can go to the next slide, Yusha. So there are several different types of grant applications as well. So you have your new application, you have a resubmission, which is only one resubmission is allowed, renewals, which are only apply to some grants, and then HIV grants, which have different deadlines. So I highly encourage that whatever funding opportunity or grant you choose, that you get to know it really well before you apply and what the conditions of that grant are. And these will be different for each grant opportunity that you select. All right, Yusha. So the submission process, once you have identified a funding opportunity that you are going to pursue, there are a couple different characteristics to keep in mind. The first is the actual submission. So you want to submit early, and I can't stress this enough, submit early, at least 2 days before the due date. You don't want to be an hour before the due date and something has gone wrong. So the specific actions to submit may vary. So again, it's very important that you understand the distinct characteristics of the opportunity that you are pursuing. And then you should get a grants.gov tracking number and a timestamp. So keep those for your records. It's important to keep track of your submission. And then you're able to track the application in the ERA Commons once you've submitted. And then you can address any errors in the ERA Commons as well before the submission deadline. So you're able to resubmit. On top of that, it will replace the previous submission. So, and then finally, once you've submitted, you can see it, you can view your assembled application 2 business days after in the viewing window. You can go to the next slide, Yusha. And I think this is where I pass it off to you. But I encourage all of you to use that reporter interface to try to identify some funding opportunities and to see where you are situated, and then get to know the opportunities that you are pursuing and make sure you know them in and out before you begin your application.
Okay, so I will go for the next steps. During the application for NIH grant funding, there are some organization registration you may need to finish. The first is a system for award management, which allows 3 weeks or more for initial registration and 2 weeks for yearly renewal. The system for award management will issue a 12-character unique entity identifier used to complete your first-time registration, which serves as the official organization identifier in other federal system. It's worth noting that the entity administrator must complete a yearly renewal process to verify entity information and retain ability to apply for or receive an award. And after the unique entity identifier is assigned, you can go ahead and register the Error Commons, which gives you 2 weeks or more to register. Error Commons is a NIH managed system that allows applicants, recipients, and agency staff to securely access, share, and transmit information. Error Common credentials are also used to access Assist, which is an NIH online system, to prepare and submit grant applications. As for grant gap, your organization information will be automatically sent from system of award management to GrantScout within 24 hours of the approval and activation of your system of award management account. And the individuals authorized to legally sign off on and submit a grant application will need a GrantScout user account with an organization applicant profile. And last, on the last one, the Small Business Administration Company Registry. I think this one is required for people who participate in small business innovation, research, and small business technology transfer federal funding programs. So after submit your application, your material will undergo peer review. The first level of review is carried out by a scientific review group composed primarily of non-federal scientists with expertise in relevant scientific disciplines and current research areas. And reviewers will provide an overall impact score to reflect their assessment of the likelihood for the project to exert a sustained powerful influence on the research fields involved, considering the following review criteria, including the significance of your grant, the investigators, the innovation and the approach part of your grant application, and the environment. Sometimes we will also consider other elements such as the study timeline, the protection for human subjects, and the inclusion of women, minorities, and children in your study. And the second level of review is performed by the Institute and Center National Advisory Councils or Board. Councils are composed of both scientific and public representatives chosen for their expertise, interest, or activities in matter related to health and disease. So only applicants recommended for approval both by the scientific research group and the advisory council may be recommended for funding. Therefore, if your original application is not funded, you could resubmit it, make some changes based on the reviewer's comments or concerns, and or submit a new application. Once you receive a summary statement, you will be directed to information on next steps, and you can contact the NIH program officers assigned to your application for some guidance. If your application results in an award, you will work closely with the program officers and the grants management officer on budgetary or some administrative issues, and the grants specialist will contact you to collect some information that we'll need for the award. So after the award decision is made, first you will get a notice of award, the legal document issued to notify the recipient that the award has been made and that funds may be requested from the designated HHS payment system or office. Notably, notice of an award is issued for the initial budget period. The notice of award will reference those budgetary commitments if subsequent budget periods are also approved. So funding for subsequent budget periods is generally provided in annual increments following the annual assessment of progress. You will accept the NIH award and its associated terms and conditions by joining or requesting funds from the payment managed system or upon the endorsement of the check from the U.S. Treasury for foreign awardees. You must pay careful attention to the terms and the conditions of that award, particularly any specific to the grant, because you may unknowingly violate the terms and the conditions of the award. In those cases, NIH may restrict the award, institute some special monitoring procedures, or potentially terminate the award. So after you receive a word from the NIH, there are still many things to do to successfully manage your federal funds. Firstly, you are responsible for managing the day-to-day operations of your grant to identify potential problems and areas where technical assistance might be necessary. And also, your organizations must have financial system in place to monitor grant expenditures. In addition, all requests and require prior NIH approval must be made in writing to the grants management officer at least 30 days before the proposed change. If you have any questions, you can also contact the grants management specialist for the program official named in your notice of award. And you may also need to submit various reports due at specific times during the life cycle of a grant award. All reports must be accurate, complete, and submit on time. And then these reports would include the progress reports, which include accomplishments towards the goal of the project, plans for the next year, the manuscripts and the publications you have produced, challenges in the projects you have met, and the methods you plan to resolve this. And also the invention reports, financial reports, especially the federal financial report, cash transaction reports, and the federal financial report, expenditure data report. I think that's all the detailed information of the grant application process. Here, we have also drafted a handbook to guide you to some research grant writing. And this information could be found through our website. Here, I have attached the link of our website. Also, in addition, you can have the access to how to look at the previous views and PPT slide and some other materials of our previous lectures. Yeah, and I think many of you may also interested in how to get your certificate of completion after you finish our lectures. So for this information, Jill and Lauren, do you have anything to announce? I think the first of all, you'll need to finish the survey of our lectures, and here I have attached the survey link on our screen. And the second, we may also need you to finish the draft of the grant of a grant introduction part, and I think we will give you the detailed information in our email. And Lauren, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, you're correct. There's a couple questions at the end of the survey that just ask if you have completed your specific aims, if you've watched all 5 of the sessions of the previous sessions, and then just asking for your email address to receive your certificate.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. Yeah, and the last part will be our Q&A session time. Yeah, here we have invited two of our early researchers who has rich experience in the grant application, the Dr. Rayner and Dr. Vatkis, and here, and we want to thanks again for them to help us with the Q&A session. And here, if you have any questions, both in the writing of the grant or some process of the grant application, please feel free to ask in the chat box or in the Q&A part. And yeah.
Thanks so much, Isha. And so just maybe a quick introduction. So because I am with Isha from the team at SESH, and I just finished my stint as a postdoctoral fellow, and just wanted to just say hi to everyone, and if there are any questions here, Dr. Batakis and myself will be happy to answer them.
There's a question in the Q&A. It says, how do you approach the reviewers' questions to improve the grant for resubmission?
Rainer, you want to take that first as a researcher, or?
Yeah, sure, Dr. Vataki. So I guess so one thing I would say is, Isha introduced both of us as senior researchers. For me, I would say that I'm more of a junior but researcher who has done more of like career development grants and maybe like smaller grants. So I'll definitely speak to my experience around some of these smaller grants that successfully applied for. At least based on what I've been doing and what I've been helping to do for larger grants is that generally there will be a point by point kind of feedback from reviewers and making sure that maybe when you resubmit the grant, sometimes there might be a box, to indicate, if you have had a submission before, and if so, what has changed. I think this is like an appropriate juncture to really explain, like what exactly has been changed or what kind of revisions have been made in response to reviewers' comments. And I tend to do this point by point to make sure that like it's clear that we thoughtfully have made revisions accordingly. Yeah, over to you, Dr. Vatakis.
So yeah, that's that's good. That was a great answer. In terms of like of a larger grants, you basically, well, after you get your first review of your application, you will get basically what we call the summary statement. The summary statement will basically have an overall summary of the discussion, which was all that if your application was discussed, where it's going to be the summary that is written by me. I'm the scientific review officer who will be sitting through the review meeting. And pay attention, very close attention to that paragraph, because that paragraph essentially captures the discussion inside the room, the things that the reviewers are not writing in there, and what was the main important things that essentially drove your score to the direction, your overall impact score to the direction that I want to. Because it might be something that is very significant in your application, a strength or a weakness that basically swung the pendulum and convinced the whole panel that, this is more of a mid-impact or a high-impact application. Now, in terms of the response to the reviewers, you have one page to basically address those concerns. Focus on the most important things that really impacted your score. And you can see that sometimes you pay attention when you're reading the summary statement, because sometimes reviewers will basically focus on like, there's something that really influenced the reviewer's decision to give a particular score for your grant. And don't treat this as a paper submission where you're essentially addressing point by point because you can't do it. But as you're going through this process, you always have to remember, this is not the reviewer's grant. This is your grant application. And this is, and when it comes back for resubmission, it's not going to be the same people evaluating your application. The panels change from round to round, from submission to submission. So the new panel, when it comes back and when they look at your resubmission and your introduction and your response to the review, they will evaluate that. But at the same time, they're still going to evaluate an application based on its significance, based on its innovation. And so you have to keep that in mind when you're doing this. Don't treat this as a paper submission that I'm resubmitting it and the same people are going to see it. Treat it as saying, looking at what were the main things that really are impacting the application. Usually, what will affect the score in the application is if the topic is not, if the panel doesn't see the topic being significant, that could actually be seen panel to panel to panel if there are different people. If there's a lot of concerns on the approach, that's an easy way to address. If there were significant details in terms of your statistics and things like that. So I hope this basically helps in terms of kind of give you an overview of how to respond to the reviewers.
We have
Thank you, and I'm learning a lot as well. I see one from patients. And it goes, if we really try to be innovative in writing and it's still very hard for us, kind of elaborate on being innovative. And I would maybe sort of see this from two angles. Like one is because there is a explicit innovation segment that we've talked about, and I think there's also like being innovative in as a process. I think maybe for the first one, we went through some of the ways of being innovative in the grant, and I think a lot of it stems from what has already been done. So like the research gap. I think one way of, I guess, doing it is just to make sure that there is a proper literature review done to see, what the gaps are. And, at least in my group, or the group that I was in with Professor Wei Ming Tang, we broke it down into a few areas of innovation, right? One, it could be, whether it has been innovative maybe in your particular setting or a particular community, whether it's innovative in the broader international research agenda or the kind of the field that you are in, or it could also be innovative in terms of like maybe like research methods. So, I think there are many angles to sort of like split this up in terms of innovation in that sense. In terms of innovation as a process, maybe we might want to think through more like creative visual tools that you might use. I think that's something that we also discussed in our small group. Like how are you going to include figures? How are you going to include maybe other types of tools within your grant application that help to are innovative just beyond just the use of words, because when it's too text heavy, sometimes it becomes less compelling and harder to read for reviewers. But yeah, that's all from me.
I have nothing to add. That was very
Great. So we see a lot of questions coming in. The next one of the most common mistakes or things that cause applications to be rejected. So I guess on my end, yeah, definitely had a lot of rejections from grants. I mean, for me, if I reflect on it, some of the common feedback tends to be around, like on one end, some of the common feedback can be, maybe your research team, like you don't justify why each and every person is there. There might be like over, maybe too many people on the team, so it's like a pretty bloated team. There's been some of the comments before, or maybe you don't have the requisite expertise, so you under plan, in terms of your research expertise or team. So maybe if you need some form of like statistical analysis, but you don't have a biostatistician or someone who does statistics on your team, that can be a cause for concern. So I think the team's composition is one area that could be important. Another one is the lack of detail in methodology. So I think that is a very big part in terms of making sure that the reviewers are confident that this project is feasible, can be executed well, and has like enough detail in the grant application. At least those are the two areas that I've encountered a lot more. And Dr. Vatakis, I'd love to hear from your experience as well.
So keep in mind that when you submit your applications for review, each reviewer has a load of about 8 to 10 applications to review, and they have a couple of months, maybe a month, to basically review it. So I cannot emphasize the importance of a well-written application. Imagine if you put yourself in their shoes and basically imagine that you have like 8 to 10 papers to read, and a well-written application helps the process a lot. And I've seen this a lot. Sometimes there's applications that are great, but what they call grantsmanship is not that great, and somehow that basically affects it. You're dealing with people. This is basically the thing. So first and foremost, make sure you're written clearly. Even spelling mistakes, make sure when you submit this is just perfect. It's perfect in that respect. The second thing is absolutely clarity. What you're writing down on the paper, or what you're writing, what you're outlining, your ideas, make sure you're very clear in what you're trying to convey in terms of your message. Detail in the methodology, absolutely. Rigor is a big thing when it comes to science. Outline your statistical analysis, outline the things to basically convey to the reviewer that you know what you're doing, and you have a well-defined plan. The same thing in terms of your innovation and significance and your innovation. Make sure you clearly state those aspects of your application. In terms of the other things that I have noticed, including the investigative team to think about is like Rainer said, you can have too many or too little people. The idea for the investigative team is when you're putting it together with your collaborators is to make sure is to have people that cover the areas of science that you don't have. That's essentially what your collaborators are the people to basically fill in the gaps that you don't have. So when you come in with your application and somebody says, well, so-and-so doesn't have an experience on this, but if you have somebody on your side who actually has the background and the experience, so basically be very careful on who you choose. Don't just add a bunch of names into your application, into your team, because sometimes a lot of people do that. So that's what I can think of right now are things that could actually, in addition to what Rainer said, that actually can impact your applications. But I can state that more. A well-put application goes long ways. I've seen it. I've been in a scientific review officer for 6 years, and one of the things that I've noticed is it is a stark difference when basically a reviewer goes like, this is a well-written application, and their face brightens up. So it's really important what you submit. It basically is really clear.
Oh, great. Thank you, Dr. Fatakis. I also see some questions coming through on the chat box around mentors. I believe, I think throughout the course of this Grant-o-thon, participants have been paired. Those who submitted the specific aims and were selected for the small groups. I had the opportunity to work with some mentors throughout this whole process. I think this is a time-limited series, so it's meant to sort of work through those specific aims. I think there'll be future series as well where there you get an opportunity to do more. But the mentorship portion will end after today. But I think different small groups might have different arrangements with their mentees. So like I understand some mentors might be willing to review the grant application one more time as part of sort of wrapping up this series. But I think formally the mentorship section and so they just wanted to address that so it's clear for everyone. And I think several of you here might not have been a part of those small groups, but if you are inspired by what you have seen throughout this webinar series, we encourage you to also continue submitting for the next round. And these are some things we look forward to working with you on as well. So I see a question from Pamela. Can you recommend strategies to include Plan A and Plan B in the proposal to manage risk from innovative approaches? And I just wanted to maybe, if I'm reflecting on this question and I remember properly, in the last session approach with Dr. Hussainipour, there was something similar that was brought up, because as part of risk mitigation strategies, you might want to propose alternative or mitigating strategies, that might help to ensure that you overcome some of the challenges or risks that you have identified for your own submission. And I wanted to sort of echo what Dr. Hussainipour had already mentioned. So you might not have enough space to actually detail what your Plan B is. But I think the challenge then would be making sure that you're concise in terms of like what your alternative strategy. I think because the main focus would be trying to squeeze your grant into those like 12 pages or like even smaller sometimes for a smaller grant. So being able to use the right terminology to talk about what your Plan B is, and being concise in that sense, I think would help go a long way.
Yeah, that's correct. Especially pick one strategy, be elaborate on your main strategy of what you're trying to do, and then in your basically have dedicated a small section into your pitfalls and alternative approaches, but just basically be very brief. But make sure, if especially you have something like an innovative approach, to have an alternative strategies on approach, because if you don't, then that's for example, something that is not going to that's going to be negatively evaluated if you don't have a pitfalls in an alternative approach.
Thank you. And I see, yeah, I see other mentors also weighing in the chat box. So, feel free to also share your experiences there, or raise your hand if you have anything else to add. But I do see more questions popping up, so we will address them as they come up. One of them is by Patience. I would love to know more about grants writing, especially the budget part. I guess budgeting, how do we do budgeting? I had to learn a lot, and I think what was helpful for me, being part of an academic institution, was that we had like a research office, and like budgeting was it's like we propose a budget, but it always takes like maybe a couple of back and forth, like a week or two to really like finalize it, because what I have learned is you need to maybe in your country or your context include things like tax. When you are purchasing certain equipment, you might want to also include, when you're budgeting for manpower or personnel, you might need the right terminology to state who that is, what their salary is per year. If you're hiring them for more than 1 year, do you include like a increment or like a bonus, or maybe some kind of like prevailing, like I think like pensions or like 401k in Singapore, we have stuff like like a savings, medical savings that we have to set aside for employees. So stuff like that are things that I had to learn along the way. Other things that are super important also might be justifications for budget. So it's also important that each item is justified, and for example, down to the detail. If you're hiring a research assistant, what kind of qualifications does the research assistant need? What kind of job description would that research assistant fulfill? If you're hiring more than one research assistant, how are these two different, across what time frames? So, I think a lot of these details are important in the budgeting section of the grant.
Also, make sure you pay attention to your funding announcements, because sometimes funding announcements may have some specific requirements in terms of budgeting and what you can and cannot include, which you can work with your grant office on that. So just keep an eye on that too.
Thanks, Dr. Bacchus. And I agree with Dr. Tan as well. I guess the other point to make on budgeting is that I would look very carefully to see, is budget a score driving factor? So like at the NIH, budget is not a score driving, it's not gonna sink your grant. You need to have like a reasonable budget, but like your grant will be reviewed, and then after the review, then they'll say, all right, any budgetary concerns? So you want to have like a reasonable budget, but it's not the thing that's really gonna make or break your grant application.
Thanks, Joe. That's great. I think definitely we've had grants in Singapore where the reviewer rejected it because they said that the budget was not feasible. So like I think it's great to hear like NIH. It's definitely more about the science of things. And there's a chance to sort of like revamp or revise the budget accordingly. Based on a great idea.
During a review session, the budget, like Joe said, it's at the very end, and then it says budget acceptable, and that's what happens. It's basically like it's a very short period of time, because it's something that usually happens in the post-award process, because at that point, another NIH official, which I don't interact with as much, the grants management specialist, will be interacting with your institution to hash out any of the details, because what's proposed is normally not always what's awarded. It's the federal government, so sometimes it normally goes towards the lesser end. From what I've heard, I don't know, Joe, if you have, or Rain, or have had any luck that it went to the other side higher, but it's usually the other way around. But yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's not, and usually it's like a 10%. It's like a small kind of 10% a decrease, and I would say in terms of the other way around, the kind of the joy is like sometimes you'll submit it and you'll think, oh, this is for like the Cancer Institute. And then all of a sudden a different institute's like, oh, we want to co-fund this too. And then all of a sudden you've got two funders instead of one. It's not that they fund it twice, but that there's actually two institutes come together and both really like your proposal, which in some ways is like great because then you have two potential routes to for like further funding or further ideas. Yeah. And just I know thanks to Yusha and Lauren for their presentation, and to Dr. Vatakis and Dr. Tan for your guys' discussions. I want to go over the there's two separate surveys. There's a survey for participants, and that's the one that Rainer just put into the chat box. And so for everyone who's joined any of the calls, it would be great to have you complete the survey, and this will help us with our next grant-a-thon that we organize. We really value your participation. Even if you've only joined today or joined once, it would be great to have your feedback and input. And there's also a separate survey for mentors, and we'll put that into the chat box too. And then in terms of a certificate of completion, I know some folks have asked about that, and I think that was covered before, but just to repeat it, or if it wasn't, for those who weren't on earlier, if you would like a certificate at the end of the course, you need to have viewed at least 5 out of 6 of the sessions. And if you haven't done that, you can still go online and view them. And then you need to have some kind of draft aims. And it's really like, that's the whole point, is to kind of work on a draft grant application. So if you have any other questions, feel free to email me or to email Yusha. And thanks again to all of our mentors, to all of our participants, our mentees. This has really been a rich and valuable experience. And I think it's been really a lot of fun. And thanks especially to Yusha and to Lauren. They've really done a tremendous job of pulling this together. And the group, you know, this is like so many different groups. So thank you again. This has been supported by our UNC CFAR Tech Engaged group, by iTest, by the Hope Network, and it's a bunch of different groups sort of coming together. So thanks to everyone. And Lauren's put the links in. So we've got the mentors survey, the participants survey, and I think some of the groups, I know some of the groups are going to meet by email and not meet in person, but for the groups that are meeting online today, you can go to your respective small group sessions. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate all the questions today, and thank you so much, Isha and Lauren.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
And Yusha, you've got a very nice background. Is this like a Zoom green screen?
Yes, I find pictures that from the Google that is suitable from Zoom Office, and and I download it and apply to my screen.
I thought the Stash office got a revamp.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, I better go to my side chat. Have a good day.
Thanks, Dr. Vatakis. Have a good day.
You too.
Thanks, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, bye.
You sure you're gonna open the other room?
Oh, I'm not sure. Will we still have the 6-minute interactive session?
I think some of the groups wanted to meet. not all of them. I would just open it and leave it running in the background.
Oh, okay,
just
okay,
in case
okay,
you wanted to meet.
okay,
Or open breakout rooms or something.
okay.